Back in 2008, Aaron Rodgers did the exact same thing when he replaced Favre.
Yeah.
And he happened to get a start the year before, and I'm like, oh, he's balling. This guy's good. Boom. Next year is like my sleeper of the year. Nailed it. Easy call.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty eerie, the similarities, the statistical similarities between Rodgers and Love. I don't know if Mahomes is a goal that I would set for him, but man, his potential is pretty limitless. And one of my best takes ever was Jordan Love last offseason because I didn't have much to go on. But after watching his film versus the Chiefs, when he had to make that emergency start at Arrowhead,
Pretty good.
and versus the Eagles, especially when he came in relief of Rodgers and almost mounted a comeback. Based on really those two things alone, I started to get really excited.
Same.
What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
All across the fantasy universe, you're locked and loaded with the Fantasy Points podcast powered by FantasyPoints.com. What's up, everybody? It's your boy, Brian Drake, joined as always by the guru, the publisher of FantasyPoints.com. It's Mr. John Hansen. John, we got a youngster here who's really kind of changing the game this week. I'm excited to start talking about content creation and all the nerdy stuff, along with some NFL, lingo here. So it's exciting, man. How you doing?
Doing well. Yeah. Looking forward to chopping it up with our, it's a multi-generational program here, if you will, podcast here with a guy, Theo. I don't think he's as old as I was when I started in this business, but I did start at 26, but that was way back, probably when Theo was like negative 14, but we'll get into it. But I'm excited to be here once again, getting into these podcasts here with you, Brian, every week.
Absolutely. So we're going to bring in our guest, Theo Ash. You follow him on X and TikTok at Theo Ash NFL. And I probably don't have to say this to many of you because he's got over 270,000 followers on TikTok. I don't know if I have 27 followers on TikTok, John. And we'll get into all that. Theo, man, welcome to the party. What's going on, brother?
I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be here. Did you guys know Vince Lombardi? Did you guys break down Bart Starr and the Ice Bowl and all that?
Just missed it for yours
Just missed
truly,
it.
but I do remember John Madden winning a
There we
Super Bowl
go.
for the Raiders. So that's probably my first Super Bowl memory would be that era there. Steelers, Cowboys. I saw Terry Bradshaw and Roger Staubach battle it out in the playoffs when I was like 7 years old. I am a Vikings fan, as we discussed off air. And, you know, by the way, not to go right into it here, but hopefully you're fortunate enough to be around in this business as long as I have, and you get to know a hero or two of yours. My first sports idol in football was Fran Tarkenton for the Minnesota Vikings, of course, the Hall of Famer. And then 25 odd years later, I ended up doing a weekly radio show with him on Sirius XM. So you never know, man.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I just started watching some of the first Super Bowls this offseason, just kind of out of boredom. Went back and saw what it was all about, and it was good back in the day. Honestly, I was impressed. I was watching even before like Madden and stuff like that. But who was it for the Raiders in Super Bowl II? Was it? Can't remember the name.
Darryl LaMonica.
That's exactly right. Yeah, him and Bart Starr were kind of cooking. Joe Namath in the next one.
Right? He was bombed away, dude.
Yeah, he was. So
So we're happy to have your audience from it's at the Stay Hot Pod, right? Stay Hot Podcast. So John, when I told him the name of the podcast, the Stay Hot Pod, he goes, "That's the thing the kids are saying?" He's like, "I've been saying that for years." So John, how you guys came up with that? Now, John, tell us the story about how you continue to stay hot when you're killing it on the mini golf course.
Well, I legit LOL'd when I heard that, because that to me is awesome. It's almost kind of like it's so bad it's good. In that way, it's a little obnoxious, but you have a little swagger about you. I feel like, I'm not sure the origin. That's my take on it, but I think it's hysterical. So congratulations on a cool name for your podcast.
Honestly, we didn't come up with it at all. Well,
Oh,
it's a little bit older than us, I think, and the
that's
guy who
right.
named the
Okay.
podcast is our former producer, and he's a baseball guy. He runs a Yankees podcast, and I
Okay.
never really even realized, like, or thought about what Stay Hot meant. We were just kinda happy to have a name, and it's more of a baseball thing, right? Like, someone
Right.
gets hot hitting, he says, "Stay hot," like,
Okay.
I first heard it in the MLB like video game, like some character off screen yelling "Stay hot" at my character, and I
Right.
was like, "Oh, it's more of a baseball thing." Our podcast names were way younger and dumber than "Stay Hot." We wanted just like Wadcast, which is podcast with a W at the beginning. Like that's what we found funny. Like,
Gotcha. Well, I did coach Little League baseball for like 14 years. I don't think that was but one of mine was get there. Kid
yeah.
running the outfield, get there, stay hot. But Brian and Theo, it would be funny if it was stay hot and more of a physical appearance. We could kind of view a variety of lenses here, but in a way, like, hey, everybody, enjoy your sports. Let's stay hot out there. Let's stay hot.
We're bringing it back. We're bringing it back. If it was a thing and isn't anymore, it is now. So I'm grateful for
Thanks.
the name.
There you
I'm
go.
grateful for the name.
So, you're a guy who you actually, we'll get into your whole story here. You were going to school at Arizona State. You were studying sports journalism, and a guy I actually followed, Jeff Pearlman, on social media. He's a kind of world famous sports writer. Came into your school and started talking to you guys about getting your content out, and that's how you found TikTok, right? And how you became like, all right, hey, this might be a place where I want to put my content because I mean you're so huge on the platform now. So tell our audience here kind of how you came from, just random student at Arizona State to 270,000 followers on this app.
Yeah, we talking Cronkite School over here, future
Yeah, we
big
are.
time broadcaster?
We are talking Cronkite School. That's where I was at, taking classes, but it was derailed by COVID, my
Oh,
freshman
sucks.
year at the end.
Mm,
So when Perlman came into class, it was through Zoom, and I really didn't have much going on. I was back in Arizona at this point for my sophomore year, but none of the classes were held in person. They were all, I was just at my apartment all day. A lot of my friends were staying at home doing online classes. So I had all this time to kill. I had been thinking about getting into it, but TikTok, when I first had heard of it, was called Musically, and my little sisters
oh,
used it to
wow.
post like dancing content or lip syncing content. So
Right,
I always thought the app was pretty childish and dumb, which it is.
right.
But at the time, there was no one really making serious football content on there. There were people making
Okay.
football content, but it was all pretty silly. It was just like a tweet and they were like nodding under the tweet. They were like taking it from other platforms. No one was really creating what I thought was good content on there
Right.
about football. So then Perlman came in and he was like, "You got to be on every social media platform you can be on." And I,
Sure.
after that, I was like, okay, this, like you said, he's a world's famous writer. Might as well take his advice. If there's no one on there, I think I can be the best pretty quickly. And I'm probably going to gain more of a following there than as a reply guy on Twitter. So
Yeah.
that's what I did, and I was right. I mean, I gained a following pretty quickly. That algorithm does a really good job of showing people who don't follow you your content. So it's pretty easy to get viral content on there compared to a place like Twitter. So or Instagram or I could have done YouTube and I waded into the YouTube waters a little bit, but there's a lot of great content creators on YouTube and it's harder to stand out. So that's how I got my start. That's how I went from student to TikToker. And then because I had so much free time, it was very easy for me to continue making videos. And it got to the point where I was focused so much on making the videos that my schoolwork started to stuffer.
Uh-oh.
And eventually I just focused full time on working.
All right, more with Theo Ash and the Guru on the Fantasy Points podcast coming up next. All right, guys, welcome back in. Theo Ash is our guest. You, of course, follow him on X and TikTok at Theo Ash NFL. And Theo, you just started talking to us about you're in school, you're a junior at Arizona State, you get on TikTok. What finally pushed you over the edge to say, like, wait a minute, I can make money doing this?
Right.
And then did you see a check start to come in and you go, oh, the light went off. You're like, wait a minute, what am I wasting my time here for? I'm already doing the job. You see that with a lot of guys who, like the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world when they just leave college
Hmm.
because Well, I'm doing the job. What do I need the piece of paper that says I can do it? I'm here. I'm reporting on sports. This is why I'm here to begin with. And oh, by the way, there's money coming in.
Yeah, it was just that. I mean, there's a page on your profile where you can see revenue coming in, and that's what I saw. And beats paying tuition, right? I could either
Right.
pay to do the job, or I could get paid to do the job. And I feel like sports journalism, especially, is a job of connections, and it's a job of how good your portfolio is. And I really loved Cronkite. I think it does a great job of helping build a portfolio and getting you internships and letting you cover sports and all that. But it's also very traditional in terms of how it approaches sports journalism. Like, I'm not quite a writer. I'm not quite
Right.
someone who's going out and interviewing coaches. I'm
Right.
someone who's going over data, watching film, and then putting forward my own opinion, which doesn't really lend itself to what I was doing at the journalism school, which, all that stuff is also really fun. But that's where I was really starting to find my niche. People knew who I was. Um, and so I was like, I don't think I need to complete this. And you can always go back to college, and
Yeah.
you
Wow.
can't always strike while the iron's hot on your career, I feel like. So that was, yeah, it was just that simple. Money was coming in.
Yeah, yeah. I have a son who graduated from Delaware a couple of years ago. Now he's got a math degree and he does a little side business, but his main gig, or at least 50-50 in terms of his actual degree, is doing YouTube videos, offering commentary on a certain video game, but they're like long form videos, two
Hmm.
hours that take him up to 3 to 4 months to produce. They do really well. But boy, it takes a ton of discipline for him, working for himself, to wake up every morning and grind it out. So do you find that to be a challenge in your world, or are you just so into it and energized that, it's not really work to you?
It's hard, definitely. I mean, I have no boss and no coworkers, and it's just me and
Right.
and my girlfriend here, and that's mentally, like, difficult, I think.
Absolutely.
I don't talk to, and I didn't play football, so I had to learn it all on my computer, basically, and kind of learn on the job. And because I'm consistently producing content, there's not a lot of time to sit back and just intake information and learn. And
I did the same thing, dude. I really
Mhm.
did. Starting in 1995, learning on the job and flying by the seat of my pants, but working my ass off. And it seems like you're doing the same thing.
That's what I'm trying to do, and I'm not sick of it yet. There are definitely times where I feel disappointed in my output, or I wish I was doing a better job, or I wish,
Right.
something. Yeah, I still have, but I think that's also ambition. Like, I think I could be better. I think I could
Mhm.
be bigger. I think I could make better content. And the exciting thing that I always go back to is I can. Like, I can I can do make better content. I can uh, learn more. Like, that's kind of my job every day. And it's definitely difficult, and it's something I can't talk about as a master of it yet, because I it's still a
Yeah.
situation that I feel like I'm um, in the middle of. Like, do I want to work for a company and have deadlines and stuff? And maybe that
Right.
would be a little bit more of a sense of accomplishment, that I actually have, like, okay, a goal that I have to do, instead of like kind of these loose ideas in my head. I don't know. So it's definitely a little difficult, but at the same time, every job has its difficulties, and I persevere through it. And a lot of the times I am really enjoying what I'm doing, and it doesn't feel like work when I really get a good handle of what I'm looking at, and start to really form an opinion. And then you watch more and more, and you look up more and more, and you're thinking, okay, I actually feel pretty good about this. That's when it really gets fun, I think, when an agenda starts to come together, or a take starts to come together, and it feels like, okay, I could stand in front of a room of people and explain myself, and actually have something interesting to say with the data to back
Wow.
it up, or the film to back it up. And that's when it gets exciting. And I do love to, I love to have takes. I love to have an argument. I love to say my argument. So when it hits and I'm proven right or proven wrong or whatever, like, it's fun to me a lot of the
Oh,
time. But
it's
definite
like a drug. Let's be honest. Come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
We're
mean, it
addicted. You know
is.
what? You know what my phrase is? Here's my phrase. And by the way, I not to be self-indulgent here, but Brian, I mean, Theo really does remind me of my own mindset, basically.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's
And
what
I'll say this too. Um, you can do all those things. You can work for a company while doing your own thing. I mean, you can really
Mhm.
piecemeal it together. So there's some advice right there. But I mean, Brian, very articulate. I can tell you this. He does remind me of myself, but there's absolutely no way in hell I was that articulate and really the brevity with so much that he said there was outstanding job, young man. I must say. I'm
you know what it
impressed.
is too? He's got great hair, and that's, the
Oh,
first
oh,
thing I
forget
notice
about it.
about people.
He's like a number one pick in a good hair league.
Yeah, he's like a young Justin Herbert over here with
There we go.
this
No
coif going.
kidding.
I love that. There's a lot of content creators after COVID on TikTok that talked about being burned out and, they couldn't come up with anything anymore. And it's kind of just, they're hot for a second and then they're
Outwork him,
gone.
Theo. That's my advice. Outwork him
Yeah,
like
man.
Brady.
Do you have a plan where you do like a content plan? Like, all right, I'm going to do this stuff this month, or is it kind of just flying by the seat of your pants? Like whatever the news is of the cycle that day, like, hey, I can create something about that.
I should have more of a content plan than I do, certainly. There are series that I can think of, and then that gives me content to make over the course of the off season. Like, I watch every quarterback and talk about all of their interceptions, and that's something
Mhm.
I can do 30 times, right? I can talk about all of Lamar's interceptions and talk about how bad each of them was, and then if I need to talk about something, I can talk about Goff doing that or whoever, right? At the same time, I'm watching the old Super Bowls. That's 50 episodes I could make right there. So, I
Right.
have these series that I can always go back to, but it's not necessarily ordered out. And it very much is kind of news of the day. If the Justin Jefferson contract extension drops, I'll make a video on that. TikTok is different than YouTube, where it doesn't take me that long to make a video. Maybe it takes me a day to scout everybody and an afternoon to put my thoughts together and record it. But it's not quite something at this point that it takes me. I haven't needed a very long distance plan, and if I made one, I think it would change. But with all the news about TikTok, and I think it's kind of falling off here a little bit, and might get taken off the App Store and all that. I am trying to pivot to YouTube a little bit more and starting to try to develop these strategies and these types of schedules, but I'm kind of in the beginning stages of doing that kind of thing.
Theo, do you have any idea? And if you don't, it's not an indictment on you by any stretch, but how fortunate you are and people like you to be able to have the vehicles and the platforms to distribute content, because up until just recently 20 years ago, let's say, the major big companies, they held all the cards, and yet
Mhm.
the fragmentation now is such that you know I'm thinking about your future. What could be your possible end game, like your dream scenario? And I'm thinking like of seven different things. You could like just focus on podcasts. You could just focus on video. You could be, maybe aspire to be an analyst on a network television show. So your thoughts on that opportunity and how difficult it must have been without, you had to really pay dues. You're sitting there talking about popping up on TikTok and blowing up already. Back in the day, dudes had to languish in like mail rooms for like a
I know.
decade. You know what I'm saying?
It almost feels too easy. It feels weird to say that, but it really did. I mean, it was if you put out good stuff, it got noticed like right
Yeah.
away. And yeah, it is super lucky that these avenues exists. And social media has its downsides, and it's tough to, I think, make good content on social media because it kind of lends itself to making shit. Like, sometimes that's
Right.
what makes the most money, right? So
True.
that's kind of the great internal debate, is like, oh, I could put something out that would make everybody mad, and it would be so easy, but you do have to put in a little bit more work than that. And I think that's what's good in the long run, is like it could be even easier, is the scary thing. It's like, yeah, it's like
Yeah.
anybody can get a platform, like anybody can get a platform. And you don't want to be anybody sometimes. Like, there's some bad ones out there because of it. But yeah, I am very fortunate, and a lot of young people are very fortunate about how that all worked out.
Where is that going? Because we've seen ESPN, they have shifted away from highlight shows to now it's hot take Stephen A. Smith bullshit. That's what we see
Hmm.
out there now. And it's the Skip Baylesses of the world. Do people want the hot take click bait articles, or do they want something you're doing and doing pretty well, or it is these analytical breakdowns with actual some thought behind it? Heaven
Yeah.
forbid. I mean, remember those days.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's definitely trending. I'm optimistic about the future because I think you can't help but look at the stuff that I make and the stuff that a lot of like big YouTubers make. Like Brett Coleman comes to mind, Alex Rollins. These are dudes on YouTube who do really great in-depth breakdowns about football. They get millions of views and they have a very nice lifestyle, and they are, set up because they do good work. And
Mhm.
I feel like when good work is available to you on other platforms and it's getting all these views, and people are being very successful based on putting the work in and actually saying something interesting, like it becomes very easy to see, the BS for what it is. And I think ESPN has done a like that's a huge network, and obviously Stephen A is kind of a famous like, shock jock or whatever you want to say. But
Right.
ESPN has also, I think, done a decent job pivoting to um, better minds, or more in-depth minds. I mean, one of their analysts just got hired to be a head coach of the Lakers, right? And everybody loved his podcast and his stuff. And so I really think
Yeah,
the
true.
future
Mina
is
Kimes is
is
outstanding.
yeah, Mina, puts in more work than I do, probably. Like she goes
For
and
sure. Oh, for
has
sure.
a huge platform. And Orlovsky, even, like, he'll go onto the screen, and I don't always agree with what he says, certainly, but he'll put in, like, do a film breakdown, right? And I think that kind of stuff is all very popular in terms of views. And I think that that is the future of the industry. I think these guys need to realize, like, hey, um, people like that, and then people also like real charismatic personalities, like,
Mhm.
and this is like the Pat McAfee side of it, right? He's not really giving, although he brings people on that give film reviews and stuff like that, but he himself is like, it's just fun to watch how he reacts. And I guess that's kind of the same thing as Stephen A and Skip. Like, people just like to see what crazy thing he'll say. But I don't know. There's just so many eyes everywhere now that there's room for kind of everything. So I guess the
Mhm.
future is just everything.
So are you like 100% analyst? Do you do any infotainment, on the podcast? And then, as an analyst, are you a data guy? Are you a film eyeball test guy, or are you data plus film guy?
I try to be data plus film. Definitely become more film like pilled as my career has gone on. When I started, like, I really knew nothing like about the game and the strategy and the plays and the formations and stuff like that. And I would do player reviews despite not knowing anything. People would still watch them, and then I was like, before like real analysts join TikTok and dunk on me, I've got to like learn my shit. And so it's been
Yeah.
years of trying
It
to
puts
learn it. And
pressure
I
on yourself to do the work so you don't look like a
mhm.
jackass.
And the more I learn about the film, the more I realize that stats can't account for everything. And then I like the eye test a little bit more. But there's no way you can watch everybody, and you can't see something, or you can't think you see something with no statistical backing whatsoever. You gotta find something somewhere.
All right, we're going to take a quick timeout. Don't go anywhere, folks. More with our guy Theo Ash on the other side. All right, Theo, we got you back in. We appreciate you hanging out with us. Here's the Fantasy Points podcast, Drake and the Guru. We got to get some of your takes here to start running through Fantasy Points data. I was on your Twitter, Theo Ash NFL, and you're asking people to throw a stat out at me, and I'll break down the top 10 at this position. We got to make sure that all these guys are going over to Fantasy Points data, and we're going to get you hooked up with a free account over there, and you can start powering these projections and these fun stats right through the best in the business here with Fantasy Points data.
I can pretty confidently say that you're going to be all in on that. Well, let's talk a little ball here as we gear up for the 2024 campaign. I understand you are a Packers fan living in Minnesota Viking territory. We did discuss that. You see the helmet there behind me. I'm a long-suffering Viking fan. I was, in fact, in attendance in 1998. I was in attendance in '01 and predicted a bed shitting. By the way, before the 41-0 loss at the hands of the New York Giants. I was also at Bounty Gate in New Orleans for Brett Favre throwing the interception to force overtime, all that stuff. So you are a Packer fan. Yeah, it sucks, man. It's there. I don't wish on anyone else. It's been painful, but you are a Packers guy, and I was kind of a Jordan Love guy last year. So
Mhm.
I'm curious your thoughts on Love. I think he got off to that really good start, and everyone's like, okay, all right, but then he got into a little bit of a slump, and then the
Mhm.
haters started creeping out. Oh, see, and then he turned that corner, and the rest is history. Are you buying? I am, of course. Last week's guest, his son, caught get touchdown from Love in the NFC title game. Talking about Bo Melton and Gary Melton. Are you in? Or like me and Gary are, me and Bo's dad, in terms of like Jordan Love might be the NFC's Mahomes this year. Like he might emerge as a superstar.
Yeah, I am totally in on him. I don't know if Mahomes is a goal that I would set for him, but man, his potential is pretty limitless. And one of my best takes ever was Jordan Love last offseason because I didn't have much to go on. But after
Nice,
watching his
right?
film versus the Chiefs, when he had to make that emergency start at Arrowhead,
Pretty good.
and versus the Eagles, especially when he came in relief of Rodgers and almost mounted a comeback. Based on really those 2 things alone, I started to get
Same,
really
same,
excited.
same. Yep.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And guess
Especially
who
the
I did
Eagles
that with,
game.
by the way? Back, like Casey Kasem, we don't even know who that is, but back in 2008, Aaron Rodgers did the exact same thing when he replaced Favre,
Yeah.
and he happened to get a start the year before, and I'm like, "Oh, he's balling. This guy's good." Boom. Next year, he's like my sleeper of the year. Nailed it. Easy call.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty eerie, the similarities, the statistical similarities between Rodgers and Love. I
Totally.
don't have them all off the top of my head, but I think they had, like, very similar
Oh,
amounts
everything's
of
the same.
touchdowns and yards and interceptions and everything. Like, their
Yep.
stat lines were matched up pretty perfectly. Like and with Love, like, yeah, man, against that Eagles game, his back foot was hitting the top of his drop, and that ball was out, and he was layering it, and it really only takes one throw, and when you see just that at all, like a layered intermediate pass between 2 guys with great timing, like
Forget
you
it.
do Zach Wilson was the 2nd overall pick, you never saw that in his entire career, so if you could just see it one time with
Mhm.
somebody,
Mhm.
and much less, like, you played, I don't know how many drives, 2, 3, like, you saw a couple of them like that, and then
Yep.
you go back versus the Kansas City game, there Spags is blitzing him at the highest rate he blitzed anybody all year.
Yep.
LaFleur doesn't have the game plan because they thought Rodgers was vaccinated, and he turns out he wasn't. Like it was complete chaos, right? And all Jordan Love was doing was saying, "Okay, I'm getting lit up. Let me find Devonte Adams one on one." And he didn't hit every throw, but at least I could see what his mindset was. It's like, okay, he knows he's got the one on one with a great receiver. He's trying to be aggressive. He's trying to put his foot on the gas. He's not seeing it. He's just not quite hitting it in a really tough environment. And so when I watched those 2 games, I was like, okay, I think he's got it. I think he's developed. He's learned behind the best for several years now. He's got a great play caller in Matt LaFleur, who comes from that Shanahan system that develops
Yep.
quarterbacks like nothing. Like what could go wrong? And
How
really
much?
what went wrong was none of the receivers knew like the routes to run, and they kept getting pre-snap penalties at the beginning of the year. But when that worked itself out, he was the most effective quarterback in football the back half of the season. He threw like 1 pick after like week 12 or something like that until the NFC Championship game, and that was a rough 4th quarter. So I'm hoping he can get a little bit more clutch going forward. But yeah, I really have no qualms about him being a star.
What about Caleb Williams? We were talking about young ascending quarterbacks here, the number 1 overall pick for the Chicago Bears. Interested to see what he can do in this Shane Waldron offense. He's got weapons now. A lot of times these number 1 picks, Theo, they come in and the cupboard is bare. That's not the case here. No pun intended with Caleb Williams. You've got DJ Moore, you've got Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, Swift now in the backfield. So it's kind of all here for him. And I hope the line has been upgraded enough where he's not going to be seeing ghosts, kind of what he was seeing last year at USC. But from your film breakdown and
Yes.
thought process, what do you think of Caleb Williams this year?
I think you're exactly right that last year at USC, his offensive line was a rough situation. Just need to watch the Laiatu Latu game against USC. I mean, he cooks that entire line the entire game. And I think Caleb is still making some pretty incredible plays. Like, so there's some wizardry in there. I do think he has some Mahomes particles in him. I do think that he
Yeah.
has. I mean, from the moment he stepped on the football field at Oklahoma, he mounted the biggest comeback in like the history of the program against Texas in the Red River rivalry. It was spectacular play after spectacular play. Rattler got benched. It was like 28-7. Caleb brought him back to win, and he was the best quarterback in college football ever since. Like
Yep.
he does need to get rid of the football faster, definitely. Like he does need to keep the playground plays like under
Hero
control,
ball.
but that's Lincoln Riley's style, and that's kind of Cliff Kingsbury's style, who was his an offensive analyst there as well last year. Like I think they kind of gave him the green light to play like that. I do think he can rein it in if he has to. So I mean, as a Packer fan, I hope the Bears aren't too good, but I do think with their weapons and Caleb Williams, they'll be pretty potent at least through the air.
Another young quarterback who balled out right out of the gate, CJ Stroud. And, I've had a saying, as what I do, I'm a fantasy guy, but also an NFL guy. First and foremost, I'm not really a stats guy. I'm an eyeball guy who comes up with the same conclusions as the stats guy somehow, but that's neither here nor there. But the saying is this: if it seems too good to be true in the National Football League, the National Fake You Out League, it probably is. And seemingly, I'd say 80% of the time I bring it up and use an example in the preseason, it ends up being the case. I'm looking at the Houston Texans here, and it really truly does seem to be good to be true because D'Amico Ryans was great. Bobby Slowick was
Yeah,
great. The O-line was great. They had injuries. It didn't matter. We're adding Steph Diggs. We're getting Tank Dell back. They had Kate Stover. Now, granted, we may be something here at running back, but probably an upgrade. Joe Mixon. I mean,
yeah.
it does seem too good to be true. So your thoughts on the Texans? Do they continue to ascend in 2024?
I don't see why not. I mean, Stroud is pretty good. I didn't think the Diggs trade was quite a home run. I do think that he lost a bit of a step last year, and then they traded a second for him, and now he's going to be a free agent after next year, which it's like, I don't know if the value is quite there from a team building perspective, but they still have Tank Dell and they still have Nico Collins. So it's like, how good does Stephon Diggs really need to be if those guys take
Yeah.
another step, or if Tank Dell plays all 17 games, which we'll see.
Yeah.
So I think they're contenders. I can't see why not. Stingley
Sure.
broke out in the back half of last year. I thought that he had an incredible run late last season, and I was starting to get a bit worried about him, but now it looks like he's going to kind of live up to his draft status. And Will Anderson is amazing, and
Do you
man,
give any
I
credence to the sophomore slump in that, okay, now we have film on CJ Stroud, or was his processing and poise in the pocket just like too good? Like the guy's good, period.
I think that he might be getting a bit overhyped right now. Like I see a
Kind
lot
of
of
agree.
I mean a lot of lists have him top 5, and after Mahomes, like, he's the guy that you take. I see a lot of takes that put him on that level. He's really, really good, but Stroud's season wasn't drastically different than, like, Trevor Lawrence's season in 2022. Alright, like, if you look at the
Right.
numbers, those guys were that's a really good season for both of those guys,
Mhm.
but then Trevor came in the next year, they added Calvin Ridley, like, it all looked
Regressed.
great, and, this stuff happens,
It was a
like,
bad
guys
year.
drop touchdowns, like, he
Yep.
gets a bit
Exactly.
banged up, like, the line is bad, Doug Peterson doesn't coach as well, like, he makes a couple bad decisions in the red zone, like,
Yeah.
who knows what can happen, so you really gotta see the breakout to believe it with Stroud, and I think it could definitely happen that he throws 40 touchdowns and he's the league MVP, but that's
Sure.
not necessarily a 100% guarantee. There's still a range, and there is a world where he's disappointing because the line still has some question marks on the interior, and
Yeah.
Tank Dell's pretty small. Is he going to play 17 games? Is Diggs really
Mixon
going to
could run out
be
of
that
gas.
guy?
Mhm.
It's who knows what could happen over the course of the year. So
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't take the Texans over the Chiefs at this point, but
Right.
the Texans are still pretty good. Like we can say like things could go wrong. Like, yeah, but that's true for every team. On
For sure.
paper, they look pretty nice. So
Yep.
I do believe in him and them.
Speaking of sophomore slump, and I'm going to stay in the division with the teams that you guys know and love, and it's with the Detroit Lions. And the sophomore slump could be for OC Ben Johnson. So last year he kind of, took the league by storm, and Goff's out here looking like Superman, at least when he plays indoors. Gibbs and Montgomery are a great 1-2 punch. Amon Ra has, maybe a career year. At some point, though, does Jared Goff turn back into a pumpkin? Does some of the boneheaded plays that, their head coach is making out, does that come back to bite them? Does the fact that they really don't have a second wide receiver, we'll see with Jamison Williams, but can he put it
Mhm.
all together? You know, I'm curious about the Lions if they're going to come back down to earth. But to me, what separates them is their offensive line, John. That's what makes keeps them
Sure.
above and beyond everybody else. But Theo, what do you think? Because any team led by Jared Goff instantly scares me. I just never have faith that they're going to get over the hump and they're going to put together a championship run. I was almost proven wrong last year, but
Mhm.
I just figure the odds are with me that Jared Goff's going to end up sucking at some point.
I mean, we saw him in LA get paid and go to a Super Bowl and have all kinds of success. McVay put forward some historic offenses, and then eventually they thought we need a bit more juice. They go with Matthew Stafford, and then they win the Super Bowl. But I don't know if Goff will suffer the same kind of drastic fall off he did in LA. I think it could be a situation where they get to the playoffs and realize that maybe he doesn't have enough juice. But for him to fully collapse, I don't know. He's so comfortable behind that offensive
Yeah,
line.
I agree.
Amon Ra does such a great job getting easy looks versus zone coverage underneath. Like I don't think it'll be a complete collapse, but you look at what the Bears are building and what the Packers are building, and we'll see what JJ McCarthy does. It's a great division. And if any of those quarterbacks cement themselves in the MVP conversation, I do think the Lions could say, like, hey, they got the MVP and we got Jared Goff. So I think that it depends on how good the rest of the North is. I don't think the Lions themselves will fall off, but I do think it's possible that a younger, maybe more talented team really breaks out and surpasses them.
Well, I have found, speaking of Ben Johnson, real quick, I think he is legit. I think he's the real deal. But there is one area where it's usually a really good litmus test for offensive coordinators. I've been doing this for a long time myself, and I've seen things transpire. And it is utilizing the running back in the passing game. I think we've seen some really good offensive coordinators over the years not do that well. Like Norv
Mhm.
Turner is a good example. He did not use Darren Sproles very well out there with the Chargers, but you know, Josh McDaniels, elite. Sean Payton, elite. I think that's kind of like the last frontier for Ben Johnson there with Jameer Gibbs. I didn't call up the data points in front of me, but I was actually talking about it today on Sirius XM about Jameer Gibbs's receiving data and numbers not very impressive. And if that doesn't improve dramatically, then we might see a little ceiling there in Ben Johnson.
Yeah, I remember this time last year they were saying like, "Oh, this is gonna be a he's gonna have a role that you've never seen before," or something like that. And then he
Yeah.
was like just the running back. Like
Yeah.
he was good, but
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
I agree. They could maybe use him in a bit more of a exciting receiving role. So I agree. I think that Ben Johnson is legit, but there is still room for growth in that offense, especially with Gibbs. I agree with all that.
Yards per route run, for example, I'm looking at 135 dudes here, but only 66. So right
Mhm.
behind, right tie with Isaiah Pacheco, which I would not have predicted that one last summer.
No, no, definitely not.
My favorite thing that you've put out, and you've done a lot of things great on social media, TikTok, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. The best ever is you saying the Giants' prediction for this year. You have the G-men at 2-15.
Hmm.
I love it. I think the Giants are a shoo-in for the number one overall pick, and I think in a way
Yeah.
they really want that because then they can get a quarterback next year. But what's got you so down on the G-men besides having eyes and looking at their roster?
I don't like their offensive line or their quarterback, and I think if Neighbors gets hurt on the MetLife turf, then they're in the same situation that they were like last year, where it's
Mhm.
pretty rough. I don't know about Dable, dude. I think the stories that I heard about his relationship with Wink Martindale and how he's kind of tough to approach and like raging on the sideline. I don't know if you guys read that
Yeah.
in the Athletic. Like I was like, I don't know, and
He's
I
kind
think
of one of
Sa-
those guys, like, what you love about him sometimes, fiery, is kind of maybe what you hate about him at
Mhm.
time other times.
Yeah, and they lost Saquon, and I know that Saquon was super inefficient last year. I totally understand. Like he had what, like 3.8 yards per carry. I still think he was their best offensive player, and I think that says something about just how bad they are, and it's like now their running back is Singletary. I mean, I guess
Yeah,
the offensive line could improve, but man, I'm just not I'm not convinced that they're gonna be like when you stack up all the quarterback situations, they're at the bottom, and that's just a pretty good way to tell like who the worst team in the league is gonna be. It's probably gonna be them and the Raiders, right? Because they've got the worst quarterbacks, and
Mhm.
yeah, I mean the 2-15 is I'll say it's slightly a callback because I
Your
predicted them to go
Bengals.
2 and my Bengals take, they were
Yeah.
2-15, and it kind of became famous after that. Like if Theo predicts you to go 2-15, that you'll actually break out because I've done it with the Giants before, and then they made that playoff run and beat the
right.
Vikings,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So the 2-15 is partially like I can predict that, and it's kind of am I predicting it like they'll really go 2-15, or am I saying that and then like oh they'll go on a playoff run? It's kind of an inside joke with my followers, but they will be bad. Like I just cannot see that offense bringing them higher than third in that division. So they're going to be pretty rough, I think.
So, would you fancy yourself as part of your repertoire of content and goods, like a little bit of a scout? Do you look at attributes and break all those down? Because I'm curious your thoughts on what I call it. I don't know if other people do this, but I call it like invisible scouting. What are the
Mhm.
attributes that you can't tangibly see that really affect a player's ability to play or not? Basically, for
Yeah.
example. Daniel Jones runs like a freaking deer, okay?
Yeah.
Throws well, pretty good mechanics, I guess. There's a lot to like. Processing, I believe at the end of the day, a slow blinker. I mean, you could pick that up on film, but your thoughts on scouting, invisible scouting, Danny Dimes, whatever you got here.
There's some stuff that seems little, but it's actually big. I don't know. There's nothing that's like totally invisible, but there's stuff that just kind of makes me raise an eyebrow. One of those things from this most recent draft is JJ McCarthy only throws bullets. I never see him put
One
any kind
speed
of
thrower.
loft. He's a one speed thrower, and I guess that's a pretty common like
That could be
scouting
coached
thing.
out of him.
Maybe, but I do think that that's like part of a larger processing thing where it's like, can you
Right.
diagnose the right throw for a situation?
Right.
And yeah, you're a one speed thrower, but why is that? Like you're a quarterback. You've been throwing your whole life. You've got Jim
True.
Harbaugh coaching you for God's sake. Like if it could be coached out of him, like has it by now? And could it speak to, we see him with such a limited sample size of throws. Like how many yards did he have last year passing? Was it like 2,900? It wasn't
Yeah.
like this lofty amount, right? Or a lofty amount of passing attempts behind that offensive line that can run so well. And so when he does throw it and you see things like, okay, he's not diagnosing like the right throw for the moment. Like, how is he going to do in a bigger scheme where he's got to process way more information if like that simple thing isn't there? And it's a little thing, but that's something that's kind of, concerning for me. So I guess that's kind of the invisible scouting or
Yeah. Yeah.
something
I
that
could.
seems
And,
small but
and
might actually be big. And I'm always
and
kind of
and
looking
look,
for things like
if he
that.
doesn't do it, you're probably on to exactly why right there. I will say
Hmm.
too, I think some of in my experience, the one speed throwers who never get over it are the runners, like
Hmm.
Colin Kaepernick.
Hmm.
I have seen some other, one speed. I mean, you could argue Brett Favre was kind of a one speed thrower. It
Yeah.
worked out pretty well for him, right? Um, what are your thoughts, real quick, and just chopping it up with you here? Just some dudes talking ball, basically. But the recent trend of the NFL, like basically stopping Tyreek Hill, starting a couple of years ago, two deep safeties.
Hmm.
I think it's opening up opportunities for tight ends, maybe a little bit helping out the running backs. But your thoughts on the trends the last couple of years, and will they continue, or will NFL offenses strike back?
They'll strike back eventually. I mean, I haven't been around that long, but I agree with the saying that people older than me have said, which is like everything is cyclical. Like
It is.
things come back, and watching some of these old Super Bowls, you realize just how old some of these like Shanahan concepts are. Like like
Absolutely.
play, it was all about like they called it ball handling on the old broadcasts. Like how good can you play fake, and how does that's like all they were doing was
Sure.
play action and stuff. And now it's like the offensive meta, like, oh, you need play action. You need you need all this. And yeah, I definitely think that things will probably change in the next couple of years here because defenses are kind of having a moment. Like Mahomes, even
Right.
though he's become a better player, he hasn't had a statistical season like he did in 2019 when he won his first MVP. He had like
Absolutely.
50 touchdowns, right?
YPA
And now
way
they've
down.
right. And yeah, his average depth of target way down, and they've sold their wide receiver Tyreek Hill and invested in offensive line. Like
Didn't
I do
matter.
think offenses are starting to adjust to the too high, and I think they are going to say, "Hey, man, we'll run it at you, man." And the Ravens are a great running team. The San Francisco 49ers are a great running team. The Kansas City Chiefs aren't quite like that, but they're built through tight end and interior offensive line. And who am I missing? Is that all four that were in the end? The Lions. The Lions are a great
Oh,
running
yeah.
team. They invested
Mhm.
in running back. So
Right.
eventually, I think the boxes could definitely start to get heavier. We might see more one high, and maybe all it takes is like one running back. Like maybe it's just been a while since we've seen an Adrian Peterson level talent in the league,
Yeah.
right? Where that really scares you into yeah, maybe there'll be an era of running backs. I don't know what the future could hold where like, man, all
I'll
these
tell you
guys have
what.
franchise running backs. Like we need to go back to one high and then it'll start over again or something like that. I definitely think it'll like as they get weaker, offenses will invest to exploit the weakness. And right now it's light boxes, it's too high, it's middle of the field open. So yeah, tight
Yeah.
ends, running backs definitely seem to be the meta right like becoming to be the meta right now.
I tell you what, I wouldn't mind seeing about 950 carries this year from Brees Hall, Bijan Robinson, and Jonathan Taylor. That'll turn that league around a little bit, I think.
I agree. I agree. I want Saquon to get like back to form behind that Eagles offensive line. I'm hoping for that. I'm Josh Jacobs with LaFleur. Like love is great, but how great would it be if he didn't even need to be great? If we could just hand the ball off and he regains his all pro form. Yeah, I definitely am excited about the potential of the running back renaissance that could potentially be awaiting us in the next few years.
And you see how teams just totally devalue the linebacker position. If you're an off-ball linebacker, I mean, you might as well just not even play anymore. And they're
Yeah.
lighter and lighter. So if you can, get these athletic tight ends who can block them, so yeah, things are going to open up. I got to ask both of you guys a question because this was big for my Twitter today, and it was I didn't come up with the question, but it spurred a lot of response. Where somebody asked on some show, would you rather have Eli Manning's career or Aaron Rodgers' career? And I said, and got a lot of, pushback on, I said, if you don't choose Aaron Rodgers, you need your head examined. I don't
Yeah, it's
care that
not
he
like he
has
doesn't have a ring.
exactly. People talk like, well, Eli's got 2 rings. Who cares? Like Rodgers has a ring and he also has 90 million more dollars in career earnings and 4
Yeah,
MVPs or whatever it is, and nearly 100 more touchdown passes. So like,
They both
I don't
have
know.
plenty of commercials, that's for sure.
right.
Yeah.
Hey, who's healthier? That's whose career I'd rather have. They've both been pretty healthy over the course of their career outside of Rodgers' collarbone issues and I guess the most recent Achilles. But he kind of I don't want to say he had that coming, but like you start coming back at age 39 and 40, it's like was Eli playing at quite that age? I don't know. I
No,
guess
no,
he
Eli basically fell off a cliff.
Rodgers didn't play, remember his first, what, 3, 4 years.
True.
So he
That's
he just
true.
sat around, and then
3
Eli
years.
had yeah, and so he and Eli, were both playing up until 4 years ago. Eli retired in
Yeah.
2019. But yeah, you're right,
Tell you
John, just
what,
fell off a
for
cliff.
the record, I've never met either dude. I have interviewed Eli on the radio, and he was hysterical, by the way. Who would I rather have a beer with? That's Eli Manning all day long.
yeah.
All day long.
Absolutely, no question.
Lager, by the way, Stella or Peroni, FYI, just in case anyone cares. I'm gonna send
Yeah,
beer,
I'm
please.
I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
have to start sending you some new with my new job here, John. I'm gonna have to start sending you some samples down to the new home down south. We're gonna have you well stocked
All right,
in
nice,
Georgia. Have that.
nice,
So,
nice.
before we get you out of here, Theo, appreciate you spending time with us here on the Fantasy Points podcast. And, if you're listening, if you're new to the show, maybe Theo brought you in, make sure you find Fantasy Points on YouTube. You hit that subscribe button. If you love data and analytics and dynasty and anything that has to do with football or fantasy, it's all there on the Fantasy Points YouTube channel. And make sure you're subscribed to this podcast. But if someone's going to get into content creation tomorrow, they hear this, they go, you know what? This kid did it. I want to do it. I
Right.
want to chase that dream. What advice would you give those guys out there who are going to pick up and start tomorrow?
I would say make what you want to make. Like when I started, I didn't ask anybody or really try to emulate anybody in particular. I just had these ideas and wanted to implement them really, and that's the kind of drive that I think you have to have. At ASU we talked to Woj, and someone asked him about like getting into the sports journalism world, and his advice was don't. Like if you can do something else, do something else. Like you got to really, really, really like want it and be good at it and know it and really be able to sacrifice everything for it. And it has to be
Right.
all you want to do because it's a tough industry to break into. Like I talked about, it was easy for me posting on TikTok when I did and getting the following that I did early. That's not really going to be the case for everybody.
Mhm.
So you really gotta lock in, and I guess that's my advice. Is just have an idea, have you got to have a lot of things that you want to say, and then just say them, man. Like that's my
Yeah.
advice. Just it's quantity, and it's quantity, not quantity over quality, but you need both. Like it's quality and quantity. Like just post a lot, throw stuff at the wall, and see what sticks. And yeah, just fully dive into it is my advice without thinking too much about like, oh, is this good? Is this bad? Am I good enough? Like just you are good enough. Just do it. And
Yeah,
and
exactly.
if
I'll
you're
add
good
this
enough,
too, real quick at the end here, and then we'll let you go. I echo all your sentiments there, and I would also
yeah.
add, and you kind of touched on it too, and I've said this a lot. Be yourself. Be
Hmm.
100% authentic, even if it's
Yeah.
goofy. Like I'm an older dude here, but guess what? I talk like a younger guy. I don't give a shit. That's literally how I am. That's how I act. I'm perennially 30 years old. I have not
Hmm.
changed from when I was 30 years old. I don't give a shit. I be myself, and I think people pick up on that.
Yeah, definitely. I feel the exact same way. I think people follow me not only for what I'm saying, but also just the personality. Like it's not just the football advice and the analysis, but yeah, you got to be friendly. You got to be like you got to seem approachable, and then people will want to approach your content and listen to you. Uh, and you got to be yourself. People can pick up on phony shit,
Exactly.
and then they won't listen.
Oh man, a lot of great advice here, folks. Remember, if you're on TikTok, if you're on X, hell, or if you're just looking for a pod, remember, go find that Stay Hot pod. Give the guys a try over there. It's a lot of fun. Theo, man, we got to thank you for the time, brother. It's been a blast. I hope your girlfriend who was locked out, gets back in her apartment or wherever you guys are going here. But yeah, man, thanks, brother. We appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for so much for having me on, and thanks in advance for the data. I'm gonna dive right into it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
man. Thanks a lot. That was awesome. And stay hot with Stay Hot.
That's right.